Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to head down to England once again and we're going to have a look at a beer from another brewery that I've never tried anything from before. As I always say, it's interesting to introduce new breweries to you guys here on the channel, and this is one that I've heard very good things about, particularly from my good friend Adam over at Mersey Beers. Make sure you check out the link to his channel in the description below incidentally. Lovely guy, very knowledgeable about his beers, and he's always hosting some very interesting beer themed live streams actually, so do make sure you go and give his channel a like and subscribe and all of this kind of thing. A few months ago actually, Adam sent me a box full of English beers, but unfortunately I think he couldn't get a hold of any of this brewery's beers at the time, so it's nice to finally get around to reviewing some beers from these guys actually, so this one I think should be very interesting. For this review then, as I've kind of suggested already, we are going to head down to the Liverpool area and we're going to have a look at my first beer from Top Rope Brewery. So this particular beer is called the Imperial Canadian Destroyer. It comes in at 10% ABV and this one is an Imperial Stout. They're describing it as a maple pecan Imperial Stout. So yeah, very curious to see how this one turns out. I'm not sure if this is going to be like a more kind of pastry stout or a sweet stout or exactly what to expect from this one, but you know, that's the whole point of doing these tasting videos, is to find out what the beer is going to be like. But yeah, I know that there is a regular beer called Canadian Destroyer, about 6% ABV, so this one is basically the big brother, big sister kind of version of that from what I gather, and Adam has told me that this is a beer that sells out very quickly, so I think I was quite lucky to be able to get a hold of this one for you, and I think I bought this beer from I think this one came from All Good Beer down in Hackney in London actually. I think that's where I got this one, but the other place it could be from is the House of Trembling Madness in York, so I honestly can't remember which one of the two I bought this beer from, but regardless, it's very nice to have these guys on the channel for the first time, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this beer. But big shout out to Adam from Mersey Beers with this one, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah, let's see how we get on with this one then. So as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I'll do in the future hopefully from Top Rope Brewing. This is the very first time I'm trying one of their beers, as I mentioned. There's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel of course has a geography based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you're interested in. Do check out the playlist of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the English beers that I've reviewed for you. That's being added to whenever I get the opportunity, and as always, please do get in touch and let me know the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Top Rope Brewing then, on to my brewery notes. So Top Rope Brewing, as I've told you already, are based in Liverpool in England, and they were founded by Neil Rothwell and Ben Jackson. So the pair apparently met in early 2015 and they were involved in Brewdog Liverpool's home brewing club, and apparently they bonded over an interest both in beer and also in pro wrestling as well, and then they later started home brewing together in Ben's parents' kitchen. So yeah, in May of 2016, Ben discovered that his workplace was going to close, and so Neil was also keen to get out of the daily kind of 9 to 5 grind, and so they began to start planning their own brewery together. So they built a small 100-litre brewery in the back garden of Ben's childhood home in late 2016, and you know, they got all the paperwork done to get the company up and running later in the year, and then they developed their beers for their core range, and they launched the brewery officially in late 2016, and they continued to experiment with their beers through into 2017 as well. So they got really good reception for their beer in the early days, but they were kind of struggling because they were only brewing 100 litres at a time. But in 2018 they were offered the opportunity to buy a brewery in Sandycroft in North Wales, and this brewery was closing down unfortunately, but these guys took ownership of this, and it was fitted with a very nice and fairly new 5-barrel brew house, and they got control of this brewery in February of 2018. But they continued to expand the capacity of this brewery over the years, but then in January of 2021, when I'm filming this review for you incidentally, they announced that they had secured a new 3,000 square foot site in the Brasenose Industrial Estate in Bootle, which is in the northern part of Liverpool, and apparently this place that they have now has room for a tap room, so you will see a Top Rope Brewing tap room. at some point as well, which is quite an exciting development. But these days the company operate with a team of 4. Ben does the brewing, Neil is leading the sales side of the brewery, while Ben's parents, who they always say are long suffering because of their home brewing hobby, are also involved with the company as well. So his mum Pam does the accounts, while Robbie handles the stock and does the deliveries and things like that as well, actually. So yeah, a family run business, this one, which is pretty cool. And as of January 2021, these guys have produced around 60 different kinds of beer, and there seems to be a whole host of different styles in there. Imperial Stouts, New England Hazy IPAs, and a few other interesting things as well. But yeah, that was all the information I could really find on Top Rope Brewing. I have to say that these guys did actually have a really good website. You could get pretty much any information you wanted about this brewery on the website, which is not common amongst the craft breweries in England, actually. Sometimes you have to, you know, go and read the local newspapers and stuff like this to get all the information. But yeah, Top Rope, I have to compliment on the information that was available on their website, actually. That was pretty cool. But yeah, as I say, a really respected brewery in the Liverpool area, and it's going to be interesting to try my first beer from them. So fingers crossed it's a good one. But if Adam's recommending them, there's a good chance they are going to be pretty good, actually. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Top Rope Brewing for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on. And you can, of course, check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's see how we get on with this one then. So let's have a look at the artwork very quickly before we open it up. So as you can see, this one is really nicely presented. There you can see nice little design of the Canadian maple leaf round there, and then round on this side it's a little bit more kind of tribal, actually, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, there wasn't too much information actually available on this beer. It's got, this one has oats. It's based, I think this is going to be a very big kind of smooth stout, but it's an oat based stout, you know, pecan and maple added into it. But it says it's suitable for vegans and things. But yeah, 10% beer, this one, the Imperial Canadian Destroyer Maple Pecan Imperial Stout. This is a 440ml bottle, can, sorry, not a bottle, but yeah, 440ml can, this one, and I think I paid about £8 for this, actually. But the main reason I got this one, as I said, was to review something from this brewery, because I know that this is a brewery that Adam very much likes. So yeah, this was about £8, maybe €9, sorry, 10, maybe about $10, 10 American dollars for the can, and for those of you watching in Sweden, maybe about 90 Swedish kroners for this. So yeah, this should be very interesting, actually. Let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting there. A 10% Imperial Stout. So yeah, looking forward to this. I was looking forward to this, actually, since I got a hold of the beer. But I've got family over in Canada, actually, so big shout out to them. They are based, some of them are based in White Rock in the Vancouver area in southwestern British Columbia. But I've also got some family in the kind of southeast of BC as well. But my grandfather, he actually trained for the war in Canada, a little place called Medicine Hat in Alberta, and I need to go out and have a little look at the airfield that he trained at. My grandfather was a Spitfire pilot and flew from, I think it was 1940 through to 1947 when he came out of active service. So yeah, pretty cool, actually. I do need to get out to Canada again and visit some of the Canadian beer tubers and go and see where my family and where my grandpa did all of his thing and stuff like this. But yeah, I think that should be quite interesting. But yeah, there we go. So as you can see with this beer, when we poured it, it had about a quarter to a 1/3 finger of a frothy, I would say kind of fawn coloured head. That has just faded away to be a very, very thin foamy layer, but it does leave a fairly impressive ring around the edge of the glass. But yeah, other than that, I don't think we can say too much about the head on this beer, to come to think of it. Yeah, it's fading away really fast, but I mean, when it doesn't have wheat in it, wheat usually helps the head retention when it comes to these Imperial Stouts. And again, it's 10% alcohol, so when it comes to higher alcohol beers, they don't tend to maintain their head so well, actually. But yeah, this beer, as you would expect from a big Imperial Stout, it's poured a lovely kind of dark ebony type colour. If you shine the light through this, it does have a little bit of a kind of Coca-Cola coloured edge to it. But yeah, 1 or 2 big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of that head there. But I mean, overall, it does look pretty nice, I have to say. Pretty much as you would expect from a big Imperial Stout, to be honest with you. But yeah, not the haziest of Imperial Stouts that I've come across, in fairness. But yeah, it doesn't need to be. When it's oats, you know, it's going to have a little bit of haze to it, but not much, to be honest. But yeah, certainly looks the part of an Imperial Stout. Nothing overly surprising about the beer, considering what style it is. So yeah, let's have a look at the aroma and just see how we got on. Nothing surprising about the appearance of this, as I've said. So yeah, let's go for it. Ooh, that does smell very, very nice. One thing I should have also said about the beer earlier is when you were actually holding the can of this, you could tell this thing was going to be a big, dense beast. That can was pretty damn heavy. I should have weighed it actually before I came and did the review, but that can must be at least, it must have been at least 600, 700 grams or something like that. It was a pretty heavy can. But yeah, when you go into this beer, straight away you can smell, it's almost like a, you know, they say it's a maple pecan Imperial Stout. You get that from it straight away. The maple syrup comes out of this one really, really nicely. And it comes across like quite glazed actually. It's quite cakey in that sense. So it's got a lovely, bright, slightly toasted brown sugary note to it from the maple syrup. You've also got the kind of nutty elements in there as well. The nutty side of this beer comes across as very, very smooth. So yeah, it really kind of comes across like a chocolate brownie in a lot of ways, this one. But it's a beautiful smelling beer, I have to say. It gets my approval on the on that side of things. So I'm curious to know, I think this one actually does have the pure adjuncts in the beer, because remember, a lot of breweries like Omnipollo and things like that over in Sweden, they like to put adjuncts into the beer as well as a little bit of flavour essence. The flavour essence usually makes these flavours come across as a little bit more kind of candied and just sort of rounds them off slightly. And you know, in some ways it can work, like with these big lassie gozes and stuff like that they do, it works. But I am more of a fan of just adding the adjuncts into the beer and having a little bit more of a kind of purist take on it. So we'll need to talk about that a little bit when we actually taste the beer. But this one comes across as very sort of chocolate brownie like in its aroma, but the maple syrup comes out straight away, and you do get the nuts out of this one. Those are the two most kind of prominent characteristics of the kind of malty side of the beer, if you like. So yeah, that's a pretty interesting point to make about this one. But yeah, on the malty side of things then, let's focus on this. You can definitely smell the big oaty smoothness that this beer has. It smells very, very thick. There's a lot of chocolate to this one for me, and the chocolate comes across as being, you know, sort of 50-60% cocoa, so you get an element of milky chocolate in there, but at the same time you get a few of the kind of darker chocolate elements as well, so quite well balanced in that sense. There's a lot of brown sugars to this beer, not just the maple syrup. You do get a big hefty treacle molasses sort of thing. I would surmise, and just based on previous experiences, that this beer has it's had a wort boil of like, you know, 4 or 5 hours. So remember, when it comes to the colour of your beer, especially with one like this, it's dependent on two things. One, the type of malts that you use, and two, the length of the boil. When you boil the wort longer, the sugars caramelise a little bit more, and it just gives you a very thick mouthfeel, a big kind of oily flavour, but it also gives you a darker colour. And I suspect that this beer will have had at least a 4 or 5 hour boil, come to think of it. You can smell that big treacle molasses note out of this one underneath the slightly brighter and kind of toastier maple syrup elements. So I really, really like how the malty side of this beer goes together. So it does have an element of cakiness to it, but not so much. There is a slight element of breadiness to it as well, actually, but I'm sure when we actually taste the beer, that'll become a little bit kind of clearer. But yeah, underneath you get a little bit of a slightly well-fired bread crust, but that's really smoothed out by everything else. Lots of that kind of 50-60% cocoa chocolate in there. The oats are kind of smoothing out that bread crusty element as well. Big treacle molasses notes, as I said. Some sweet but slightly toasty. Toasted maple syrup elements in there, and also a few kind of nutty undertones as well. So I really, really like how everything goes together in this beer. Actually, it gets a big thumbs up from me. This is a lovely, lovely smelling beer, I have to say. Yeah, you do get a few kind of roasty or toasty grainy elements out of it, a little bit of a kind of bread crusty quality, like I said, but overall the aroma of this beer does come across as being, you know, quite cakey, like a sort of chocolate brownie like aroma, but it's also got a good little bit of sweetness in there as well. But yeah, on the hoppy side of things then, let's have a look at that. On the hoppy side of things, you've got a lovely kind of little touch of earthiness coming out of the beer. I would say, I'm curious to know what hops they would have used in this, because it might you know, there's something telling me that it might be American hops or a combination of American and English hops. You've got a nice little bit of a smooth earthiness in this one. There's a little bit of floral aromatic character out of the beer as well, but not too much, and then just a little bit of a lighter kind of grassiness as well. So yeah, I like how I do like how everything in this beer goes together. It's the aromas suit it really nicely, and obviously as you age this beer, it's going to you know, that the hoppy characters are going to drop away. I'm just checking to see whether it has a canned on date or anything like that, but it doesn't seem to. But it just says well, it actually says best before October of, pardon me, 2022. So I wonder if it's been canned in October of 2020 actually. So yeah, because it seems to be that a lot of breweries recommend 2 years for beers that are stored in cans rather than, you know, 10 years as it might have been for bottles. So yeah, maybe this beer has been in the can about 3 months. But remember, if you have a big beer like this, the longer that you age it, the more the hoppy character is going to drop off. So this one does have a little bit of a floral note to it, a little bit of a grassy quality, but yeah, it does go together really quite well in a sense. So yeah, the aroma of this beer on the hoppy side of things is kind of what you'd expect, just very, very smooth. But on the fruity side of the beer, you do get a wee bit of a kind of raisiny sharpness out of this one, but there's a lot of juicy plum in there, absolutely. And there's a wee bit of a kind of blackcurranty, blackberry sort of vibe out of the beer as well. So I really like how all of that goes together in this beer. I think it's really nice how it kind of pieces together. So big thumbs up to Top Rope for this one. There's not too much to say on the fruity side of things, to be honest, because the sort of big chocolate brownie kind of side of this beer kind of dominates, to be honest with you. It's got a big sort of chocolate brownie element to it, this one. So yeah, I really like how all of the pieces of this beer just kind of fit together actually. So big thumbs up to Top Rope Brewing for how the aroma here comes out. A little bit of kind of raisiny sharpness in the beginning, juicy kind of plum, a little bit of fig, but then a kind of oily blackcurrant note. But yeah, it's really the fruity side of the beer is kind of dominated by the kind of cakey elements to it. So yeah, take a bit of time and enjoy that aroma before you get stuck into the beer. We're going to taste this one now and just see how we get on. So this one is the Imperial Canadian Destroyer, coming in at 10% ABV, and the Maple Pecan Imperial Stout at 10%, as I said, from Top Rope Brewing in Bootle in the north of Liverpool. Let's get stuck into this one. Slàinte, skål, cheers. Yeah, this beer, I'm going to say straight away, this beer is all about the aftertaste. I've only taken one sip of this, but you know, it is all about how the aftertaste develops. You can just feel all of these more complex flavours just rolling out of this one the further you go into that aftertaste. It's a lovely beer, this. Definitely a sharing can though, so I will be sharing this one with my dad after the review, absolutely. But yeah, definitely a sharing beer, this one, of that there's no doubt. But yeah, this is just, it's a lovely beer, this one. I really like how that goes together. It's definitely, you know, it's one of these really cakey leaning, it is a very sort of cakey brownie leaning Imperial Stout, this one. It's quite dark, and it does develop a little bit of dryness out of it the further you go into the aftertaste. It's not like a kind of harsh dryness like, you know, black malt or anything like that. It is like that sort of, it's almost the same kind of dryness you get out of like coffee or, you know, cakes and things like that. It's a really interesting beer, this, but I think this is beautifully crafted. It's all about the aftertaste. It's absolutely all about the aftertaste in this beer. Like when you have the liquid on your tongue, you're like, yeah, okay, but the aftertaste that this beer develops is really nice actually. So yeah, where to start with this one then? Where to start with this beer? Yeah, yeah, it's a really interesting it's just a really interesting beer, this, I have to say. I mean, the where to start with it? I mean, the baseline of the beer, you can feel the beer does have a bit of dryness in the backbone. Let's just, this beer's very layered, let's just go with that. In the very backbone of the beer, you can feel a little bit of that kind of well-fired, bread crusty sort of thing. I suspect there's a bit of carafa in this. It's not a harsh black malt, if you like, but you can feel there's almost like a line that goes down the very middle of your tongue where there's this roasty, toasty black malt. That's the harshest point of the beer. You've got a line that goes down the very middle of your palate all the way to the back of the tongue, and that's roasty, toasty black malt that you get out of this beer. But yeah, kind of sitting on top of that, you've got a big cakey element. I mean, the middle third of your palate and the back third of your palate, it's kind of blanketed with this big sort of thick, browny, cakey element to the beer. So yeah, I like how I do like how that goes together. So yeah, the oats really, you'll notice that on top of that kind of bread crusty, well-fired bread crusty thing that I'm talking about, it's the oats that really smoothen out this beer. So middle third of your palate and then back third of your palate again, it's really interesting. On that border region, as I always say, between middle third and back third of your palate, there is a very slightly more kind of bitter quality to this one, like a more kind of toasty, grainy, brown bready sort of thing. But yeah, other than that, the oats, that kind of bread crusty backbone, the oats sit on top of it and smoothen it out. Then you've just got that wee border region in there. But on top of the oats, it feels as if the kind of maple syrup elements are sort of blended into that. Yeah, the maple syrup comes across as being, it's quite toasty, and again it's very, very oily, but it feels like the maple syrup elements are kind of blended into that. But if you go towards the front half of that middle third of your tongue, there's a little bit of a, there is a little bit of a kind of more oily, nutty quality into the beer. So you've got a little bit of that. You can definitely get the pecans coming out there. There's a few elements of vanilla in there as well, actually, come to think of it. But yeah, in the middle third of your palate, there's a big oily treacle molasses type quality out of the beer. So I really like how that side of it comes out as well, come to think of it. So there's a big, yeah, you get that big oily treacle molasses sort of thing. It's like an island in the middle third of your palate, that big oily thing. But on top of that, you start to get, there's a chocolate element to this beer. And like I said, it's about a 50 to 60% cocoa chocolate there. I can't quite figure out whether, I think the chocolate might actually be sitting on top of the oats, in fairness. I think there's a bit of the chocolate there. And as you go further into the aftertaste, that chocolate develops a little bit more of a kind of sort of dried, it's got a little bit more of a kind of dried, a little bit of a dried kind of cocoa powdery sort of thing out of it. So yeah, you do get a little bit of dryness out of the chocolate later on, but then on top of that you've got that big oily treacle molasses sort of thing. But then in the aftertaste you get these more maple syrupy elements, and the maple syrup element does have a little bit of a kind of toasty kind of quality to it as well, which I very much like. So yeah, the kind of brown sugary elements in this beer are very, very interesting for sure. Yeah, it's a lot darker in things than you might get the impression of. You might be expecting like a big sweet Imperial stout, as you would get with like Omnipollo and the Noah pecan mud pie or whatever. So you would think about that from this beer, but this one really is very, very cakey and really quite dark for me. But at the same time, it's very, very smooth. It is an oat-based stout, in fairness. So it is smooth, and it does give you the maple syrup, albeit quite toasted, and it does give you those kind of big, oily, nutty characters for me. But yeah, this is quite a dark, cakey, browny sort of orientated beer. And I do like how that kind of pieces itself together in this one. But I think we've kind of covered the most of the flavours in that malt base. But I mean, if you go to the front corners of your palate, then move diagonally back, there's a little bit of a kind of woody element to this one as well. So I really like how that, I really do like how that goes together in the beer as well. It's got a little bit of depth, a little bit of a kind of woody base to it as well. So yeah, I think that's the malty and adjuncty side of the beer covered quite well. On the hoppy side of things, back corners of the palate, there's definitely a little bit of earthiness there. Absolutely, and that's quite smooth. As you move further forward, you can feel the earthiness does creep forward a little bit, but as you reach the front corners of the palate, you do get a little hint of a kind of floral aromaticity out of the beer, and then round the front curve of the tongue, there's just a little bit of a lighter grassiness. As I said earlier, as you age this beer a bit more, those elements will kind of drop out of it gradually. I think this beer at the time of reviewing is about 3 or 4 months old. So yeah, you will still get a little bit of the hoppy character out of the beer. But yeah, on that front third of your palate, as I always say, that's where you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out. And underneath this one though, as I said, you still get that kind of chocolate brownie kind of thing on that border region, middle third and front third of your palate. There is a bit of that kind of well-fired. You know, if you think about the bit of the brownie that's on the edge of the baking tray that you have to scrape off, it's kind of like that. There is a little bit of that kind of burnt cakey sort of thing on that border region. But let's focus on the fruity elements of the beer. So yeah, for me, when you take this beer in, it's actually got quite a little bit of a kind of sultana-like quality to it. It's a little bit like a dried kind of sultana type vibe that you get out of this beer. But the, there's a little bit of a kind of juicy plum kind of quality in there as well. But really, sitting on the back of that front third of your palate, it really is very, very sultana-like, to be honest with you. A lot of these kind of dried sultana-like fruits, but as you go forward into that front half of the palate, it does have a wee bit more of a kind of black curranty sort of base to it, that juicy kind of curranty note. And as you go further into the aftertaste, you will get a little bit of a more kind of blackberry type note out of the beer. So I really, really like how all of that pieces together in this beer. It's very interesting how how everything just kind of pieces together in this beer actually. So it gets a big thumbs up from me, this one, on the fruit side of things. I didn't quite expect to have so much kind of sultana, and it's almost a slightly kind of peary type flavour you get out of the fruity side of this beer. But yeah, definitely a little bit of blackcurrant, a little bit of a kind of blackberry sort of oiliness out of the beer. So yeah, I very much like how everything pieces together in this one. So big thumbs up to Top Rope for this beer. Not quite what I expected, and it is, as I say, all about the aftertaste. But yeah, very, very cakey, browny and dried fruit leaning Imperial Stout for me, this one. The sultana type flavours that you get out of this are really, really interesting. But I think that covers the flavour profile of the beer pretty extensively, to be honest with you. So let's round off with the mouthfeel. So without question, this beer is full bodied. The carbonation is very smooth, and it's a very kind of thick. So it's not the thickest I've come across, but in fairness it does have a wee bit of slickness to it as well. So yeah, quite a bit. There is a lot of thickness to this one, but in fairness at the same time it is quite slick, and that's the oats that are going to do that, so absolutely. So yeah, in terms of the bitterness and stuff of the beer, I think this beer maybe does have about a, I would want to say this beer maybe has about a 25 or 30 bitterness, but I mean there is a bit more hoppy bitterness in the back corners of the palate as well as some roasty toasty black malt in there. So there is a fair wee bit of bitterness in the beer, there's no question about that for me, but the question is how much, obviously. The IBU count is my weakest point when it comes to reviewing beer, so I want to say there's about 30 IBUs in this. But the malty side of the beer is really smooth, there is a bit of dryness out of it later on, and it's quite a toasty element that you get out of the brown sugars, and the chocolate gets a little bit drier as well, so this beer does develop quite a bit of dryness to it, but there's a good element of sweetness in there, and big oily treacle molasses notes. Like I said, the fruit comes across as slightly more dry as well, but you do get a few oily elements to it as well. But I mean, overall, the flavour composition of this beer for me is very, very nice, and I have really enjoyed tasting this beer, and that's the main thing, of course. It's a very, very cakey orientated Imperial Stout with a good bit of dry flavour to it that develops in the aftertaste. This beer for me is all about the aftertaste rather than anything else. So yeah, I think that's a good place to kind of round off in this review, so let's leave it there. So yeah, this one is the Imperial Canadian Destroyer. They're describing it as a maple pecan Imperial Stout. I would describe it as a maple pecan brownie Imperial Stout, to be honest with you. It's really very much like that. I would describe it as maple pecan brownie if I was them. But yeah, 10% Imperial Stout, this one. Very, very cakey leaning, and just generally speaking, very, very nicely rounded beer. So big thumbs up to Top Rope for this one. I've really enjoyed this beer. So yeah, let's leave it at that for this then. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Top Rope. We will return to these guys at some point in the fairly near future, I'm sure. I'll need to get Adam to hook me up with a couple of beers from these guys at some stage. But yeah, you will see these guys on the channel again at some point for sure. This was a really nice introduction to their beer, and I look forward to trying more of them. But yeah, thank you again for watching. Check out my social media. Check out the other English, check out the English beer tubers as well. Check out my friend Adam, as I mentioned earlier, from Mersey Beers. And yeah, this was a really nice one to review. But thanks again for watching. Check out all my social media and things, and I'll catch you guys very soon. The Imperial Canadian Destroyer, 10% maple. How do you say, maple pecan Imperial Stout from Top Rope Brewing in Bootle in the north of Liverpool. Slange it, skull, cheers, and catch you guys on the next one.